Hi everyone, thanks for joining me today for my talk on accessibility and universal design in higher education. My name is Nicole Schroeder. I go by she, her pronouns. I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate in the history department at the University of Virginia, and I'm giving this talk today because I identify as disabled. Sadly, my graduate career has been plagued by ableism on a daily basis. My first 3 years on grounds were by far the most inaccessible of my career. I was prevented from securing accessible transport, I was given inaccessible routes between my classes and sections, and once I became a TA, I found that there were no job accommodations for workers available. And my story is the story of many of our students, if not the story of all disabled students in higher education. So today I'd like to talk about the experiences of disabled students at large and the ways in which we can overcome ableism to ensure that colleges and universities are safe spaces for disabled students, faculty members, and staff alike. Here are our learning goals for the day. I hope that today's lecture and our following discussion will help to evidence the following. First, I'd like to explain the extent of ableism in higher education. Ableism is not rare. It's just as common as other forms of discrimination, yet we rarely talk about it in our pedagogical discussions. Second, I want to highlight exactly what is at stake. Ableism prevents the full inclusion of students, faculty, and staff on grounds. And if we don't support our disabled community members, we can't possibly say that we support diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Once we arrive at a common understanding of the pervasive nature of ableism in higher education, I'd like to introduce you to methods that combat ableism. So third on our list is to explain the basics of accommodations. Our final goal of the day is to discuss universal design learning and to consider how UDL principles can help us foster accessibility and inclusivity, even when teaching online. Disabled members of the higher ed community are absolutely right to question their inclusion. Higher education was not designed to benefit those who don't fit the mold of the cisgendered, white, middle to upper class male student. And despite all our endeavors to support diversity and equity, our efforts at inclusion remain limited at best. Even our diversity initiatives continue to other disabled students. Diversity fellowships and scholarships tend to reference race and gender as sites of diversity, but make no claims to celebrating disability. Diversity hires are rarely disabled individuals. And while diversity initiatives are absolutely necessary, it's impossible to unentangle race, gender, class, and disability from one another. We know that higher education can help students achieve social mobility. The same is unfortunately true of the reverse. If we limit admissions and opportunities for students in higher education because of their disabilities, then we're restricting them from achieving social mobility. And it's not just students who are affected. Discrimination against disabled individuals means that every level of higher education is fraught, from undergrad all the way up to faculty positions. The CDC estimates that disabled people make up 26% of our population, but the rates of attrition for faculty, grad students, and undergrads falls far below this estimate. Only 8% of master's students are disabled, and 7% of doctoral students. Even more depressing, only 3.6% of tenure-track professors identify as disabled. And we have to remember that embedded in that percentage are all of the professors who acquired disabilities as they aged. Dr. Jay Dolmage, author of Academic Ableism, writes that, quote, universities continue to function to keep certain groups of individuals out of the workforce and away from status positions, and away from knowledge and dialogue and power, and not just through admissions. And he's absolutely right. We often remark that the hiring market fails early career scholars, but it does more than just fail disabled scholars. It discards us entirely. And even if we somehow miraculously make it to faculty positions, the likelihood that we will find the institution to be supportive or even to follow the basic legalities of the ADA are slim. There are no accommodations for the tenure track review process, or for teaching, or for research. If you are disabled on the market, you have to outperform your able-bodied peers. And few of us can meet the productivity standards shown by our peers. I can't work a 60-hour work week, and I shouldn't have to. We have normalized taking on unpaid labor, and we have cast certain assignments as, quote, service to the profession, end quote, when really those tasks should just be recognized as a part of the faculty job. Yet we demand that people perform these tasks on top of teaching, on top of publishing, which means that even able-bodied people have to pick and choose what they'll excel in. The system praises those who work above a 40-hour work week. It prioritizes bodies that can keep going without pause or rest. It demands that we give more and more without recognizing that that is not healthy mentally, emotionally, or physically for all of us to continue at that pace. And when you buy into that work mentality and contribute to it, you are practicing ableism. You are helping to model standards that disabled people will never be able to meet. For disabled people to even come close to meeting the standards the profession currently demands of us, we have to secure accommodations. But that process has really high stakes for us. Jay Dolmage and Stephanie Kirschbaum, two disabled academics, explained in an article for Inside Higher Ed that, quote, for many disabled scholars, the sorts of choices they face around disclosure and negotiating job market accommodations are deeply complex, fraught, and above all, risky. And for none of them is the process easy, uniform, or predictable. Asking for accommodations means that those of us with invisible disabilities have to out ourselves. And unfortunately, disclosure is synonymous with stigma. Disclosing with a disability seems to be the scarlet letter of the academy. When you think about it, it's ridiculous. Tenured male faculty members can sexually assault female students and keep teaching, but disabled academics ask for accommodations during their job search, and they're assumed to be incapable of meeting the demands of the job. I myself have been told from able-bodied and disabled members of our faculty that I should hide my disability on the job market, that I shouldn't write about being disabled in my diversity statement. I can talk about all of the advocacy work that I do for disabled students, but I shouldn't mention that I also embody a disabled identity. We continue in our language, whether explicitly or implicitly, to categorize disability as liability. And we continue to shame those with disabilities into hiding their identities. And if someone with all of the privileges and protections of tenure is unwilling to disclose their disability status, what does that tell our students? It tells us that there is no such thing as disability pride. It tells us that any legislation to better the lives of disabled individuals, like the Americans with Disabilities Act, did nothing to ensure inclusion. It tells us that we will always be viewed in higher ed or on the job market as a liability. Those discriminatory processes have trickled all the way down the hierarchy in higher ed. And even when disabled students make it to university, time and time again, we fail them. Unfortunately, even when we finally get disabled individuals to campus, whether as members of our student body or faculty, we tend to fail them. And you may think, I've never had to implement accommodations, or I've never noticed I have disabled students, but they are here. Despite all of the barriers they face, roughly 20% of undergraduate students are disabled, as reported by the U.S. Department of Education statistics from 2015 to 2016. We definitely have disabled students in our classrooms, whether we're aware of it or not. Despite the fact that a fifth of our undergraduate population is disabled, it's something we regularly talk about. And unfortunately, many of those students, although enrolled, drop out before they earn their degree. Only 13% of U.S. citizens over the age of 25 who are disabled have a bachelor's degree or higher, compared to 31% of the able-bodied population. So we have a gap in both the percentage of students accessing higher education and another gap in graduation rates for disabled students. There are a lot of different reasons why disabled students drop out. On the whole, they tend to take longer to degree. Only 2/3 of them finish their degree within 6 years, and they report an average of 60% more student debt upon graduation when compared to their able-bodied peers. The risk-reward balance already weighs heavily towards the risk side of the equation when students enter undergrad. They face odds like they're more likely to drop out, to go into debt, to face ableism and discrimination, to be disjointed from care networks like their family and doctors, and they have to advocate for their own accommodations, right? And the rewards are pretty small. They get a chance to attend college, just like their peers. And unfortunately, the risks, although already weighted towards the risk side, tend to pile up once they arrive on campus. 2/3 of disabled students do not receive accommodations at all, largely because they do not know how to ask for them. So if you're thinking, I never had to give accommodations, you're probably right. But students in your class probably needed them, and definitely deserved them. They didn't receive them because they didn't know what to do, or because they felt ashamed of needing them. Those who do request accommodations often do so in years 3 or 4, when they've already failed out of classes or struggled. And even when students apply for accommodations, the process itself is tricky, and the results are disappointing. The Association of Higher Education and Disability reported back in 2008 that the budget for disability services averaged about $260,000 annually at each university. When we apply these averages to our own student body, that means that the school spends, on average, $77 per disabled student annually. I cannot begin to unpack how problematic that is. So what are students supposed to do when the university itself refuses to invest in their education? When it draws out their time to degree because it refuses to accommodate? Students are facing these heavy burdens, and they shouldn't be doing it alone. So what can we do to help? In 2019, there was a study focusing on the experiences of students who self-identify as disabled. The study concluded, quote, "When academic institutions respond inadequately to discrimination, mental health symptoms are worse. Providing good support did not seem to lessen mental health symptoms. We recommend that academic institutions focus on prevention of disability-related discrimination rather than providing support only after discrimination happens." And so that's our task. We need to predict disability-related discrimination and prevent it before our students suffer. And that is a massive challenge for new educators, especially in this moment. You will not be able to check in on your students after class. You will not pick up on their habits and mannerisms. You won't notice if they had a particularly bad day. It will be harder to form emotional connections, to form a space of mutual respect where students feel okay coming to you with problems. So we have to be really proactive about dismantling ableism before it can affect our students. We have to commit to making sure our classrooms offer a safe space for disabled students, because we know the wider world does not offer them that security. The most obvious way to support disabled students is to help them secure accommodations by providing resources to the Student Disability Access Center, which will then provide their accommodations. We've already talked about the fact that students worry about applying for accommodations. So what can we do to ease that worry? First of all, we can make explicit notes in our section syllabi about our commitment to diversity. Second of all, we can embed web links to SDAC in our syllabus, and we can signpost how absolutely normal it is to use accommodations. When I teach, I usually start the first class by going over resources and classroom policies. I talk about the fact that I had accommodations all through undergrad and in my grad classes, and I succeed because of them. I also remind students that 20% of their peers are disabled. They are not alone. And most importantly, I dispel myths about the nature of accommodations. I make sure that students know that I won't disclose their disability or accommodation request to anyone else in the class. I also remind them that they do not need to disclose to me at all. I explain to them that when they go to SDAC and file for accommodations, teachers only receive the accommodation request. We don't get any information about their medical diagnosis. And I tell them that they will never need to prove their disability to me. The accommodation request is more than enough proof. I remind them that SDAC offers screening, that they don't need a diagnosis in order to reach out. I also spend time detailing for them what accommodations are possible. This is really important because most students feel like they're not disabled enough to need accommodations. And they often think that accommodations just mean extensions or time and a half, because those are the accommodations they see their peers using. So I detail the full range of services that SDAC provides, and I tell them that they are absolutely welcome to come talk to me if they're waiting for accommodations or struggling to secure them. I also remind them that it's best to ask for more than they think they might need. It's good to have assignment extensions in place because you might need them in the future, if not the present. It's better to ask for more upfront than to struggle midway through the semester. And then, of course, you can help by providing their requested accommodations. And I want to just stress here that you are legally obliged to provide accommodations. If a request is unmet, that is a violation of the ADA. If you see or hear of a professor refusing to provide accommodations, you can report that individual to SDAC. To be completely honest, since you are responsible for grading, holding sections, and collecting assignments, you largely have the power to implement accommodations yourself without asking your professor. I have routinely offered students extensions on assignments and followed up with them without saying anything to the instructor. There are a number of accommodations that involve you, the teacher. The most commonly seen requests are for quiet exam spaces, time and a half on test, excused absences, and note takers. When you teach on grounds, you can organize for students to take exams in a quiet hall by simply sending the test material to SStack, where they will proctor exams for you. If you're in the history department, you can also talk to Kelly, who can book you a quiet classroom. One thing I will say is that professors usually toe the line on this particular accommodation. They will often book a quiet room, but place all students with said accommodation in the room. Technically, that's a violation of the accommodation. Even if students say they're okay testing with others, it's pretty coercive to ask them. They shouldn't need to out themselves to other students in the classroom. Extensions on written work are also really easy to provide. Just make sure you mark the extension in your gradebook and write follow-up emails to your students. Make sure that you agree on a due date and that you don't forget to add grades into your gradebook once received. And if you need a note taker for the class, usually those are solicited in the first week. So you'll ask someone to volunteer as a note taker. They will upload their notes every week to a website, and you can then check them to make sure the content of the notes is appropriate. Providing accommodations is only the first step that we can take as educators to ensure accessibility in our classrooms. To be honest, we can't count on the existing processes to combat ableism. We know they're not effective, and they will become even more ineffective throughout the course of the pandemic. To receive accommodations under the ADA, students need proof of their medical diagnosis from a doctor. Yet screening is literally the lowest priority for medical services right now. Specialists are not screening in person for ADHD or other learning disabilities. Chronically ill students are not able to gain access to their regular treatments because their medical facilities are closed, or because they're too vulnerable to enter spaces of potential contagion. And even if we discount the current moment, the reality holds true that medical diagnosis for the basis of accommodations is a bad idea. We know, for example, that the medical field openly discriminates against women and racial minorities. So these groups, who are already at the intersection of multiple disfranchised identities, face compounded levels of discrimination. They can't get a diagnosis because medical professionals treat their symptoms as fake. They can't get accommodations because they don't have their diagnosis. The expansion of disability services to cover immunocompromised students right now is also an improper use of the department. The ADA only covers a very specific list of medically recognized disabilities. Many immunocompromised people do not fall under the purview of the law, such as pregnant women. Having a weakened immune system does not necessarily imply that you are protected under the ADA. So telling these students to just secure accommodations is a cop-out. They won't be able to. Instead of hoping that students will secure resources, we have to make them available from the start if we want a truly equitable classroom. And that's the beauty of universal design learning, which I'll abbreviate as UDL for the rest of the talk. Accommodations are only useful to students because the provisions they offer are not generally included in the class. But what if we just included those provisions from the start? What if we guaranteed excused absences, flexible deadlines, a variety of methods of engagement, and provided accessible source material? We can make sure that accommodations are accessible for all of our students, whether they have SStack approval in place or not, if we just implement them in our course design. And I want to note here that UDL doesn't entirely negate the need for accommodations. Students should still reach out to SStack because they deserve services and adaptive technologies designed to make learning more accessible. UDL is, quote, a framework to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all people, end quote. When we reconsider our course under UDL guidelines, we are pushed to reassess why we're teaching, what we're teaching, and how we're teaching. It reminds us that we need to start the term from a set of desired outcomes. And those outcomes are really hard to pinpoint. Luckily, UDL guidelines offer a starting point for us. The guidelines tell us that we generally want our students to emerge from class as purposeful and motivated. We want them to be resourceful and knowledgeable about the course content. And we want them to be strategic and goal-oriented. In other words, we want students who are inspired, who have gained the necessary skills and facts, and who will apply those skills and facts in a meaningful way outside of the classroom. With these goals in mind, we have to work backwards in our curriculum. And so, if we start with our 3 goals, then we have to ask ourselves, do my assessments offer fair judgment for whether or not students have met these goals? And then if we take a further step back, we have to ask, do my classroom activities foster skill development that I can test? And then finally, the furthest step back, do my classroom policies promote these activities and assessments in an equitable manner? And then, even bigger questions we have to ask, do these activities engage all students? And if they don't, can we offer differing options? We have to ask, can everyone in class access these materials? And what modes of communication are we prioritizing over others? UDL strategies emphasize flexibility and individuality. They remind us that our students have a range of talents, interests, and goals of their own. Under UDL, we're challenged to make the classroom an inclusive space for all of our students. Hopefully, I provided you with enough details and resources in the UDL guide to move on from theory into actual application of the model. I don't want to waste any of our time together by going through the individual details of the model, but I do want to talk about what this looks like in the classroom. First of all, a UDL modeled classroom acknowledges the barriers that students are currently facing. And right now, in this moment, students are facing even greater barriers than we're used to. Undoubtedly, students will struggle with mental health issues this term. Students will lose family members. They may fall sick with COVID-19 themselves. And they will have heightened mental health symptoms due to isolation. And there are a ton of issues surrounding access that I hope you've already thought and spoken about. Some of your students won't have a safe space to Zoom into class where they feel comfortable talking. Some will not have secure internet. Some will not have a quiet space to learn and work. Some will be doing caregiving responsibilities on top of their studies. Now that we're almost fully online, I would ask that we revisit our classroom policies. And even when we return to teaching on grounds, we really need to ask ourselves, are these policies equitable? And do these policies foster the kinds of behaviors that I want to promote in class? I would highly suggest that all students receive excused absences without asking that they disclose the reason behind their absence. I would ask that you give extensions on assignments and flexible deadlines all of the time. Draft up a table of assignments and leave a column where the student can write in their own completion date. Ask that they meet with you during office hours in a scheduled time slot at least twice throughout the term to go over their deadlines that they've set and their progress in meeting those deadlines. Due date flexibility helps students develop time management skills and allows them to take responsibility for their own work. At the same time, scheduling office hour sessions periodically that are required throughout the term can normalize the act of going to office hours. This can be really helpful for first-generation students who worry that they're taking up your time or distracting you by making use of office hours. Finally, in terms of policy, I would ask that you think about how to create an equitable testing environment. I have seen some pretty terrifying examples online. Students have been told that when they sit for exams, they can't leave the area of the webcam. First of all, that's ridiculous. If students needed to use the bathroom or step out of a testing room on campus, they'd be allowed to do so. I don't think harsh policies do anything to build community, nor do they discourage cheating. Apart from policy, UDL asks that you vary engagement in the classroom week to week, assignment to assignment. Don't ask that students write a post every single week. Don't ask that students involve themselves in discussions every week. When you vary the types of engagement possible in the classroom, you engage different learners. Like Monica demonstrated this morning, students rarely agree on one set of learning methods. So switch it up and create newness from week to week. You can use collaborative online tools to ensure that students understand the course content. Have students use MindMap to make mind maps. Assign a theme to a small group of students and have them present on it at the end of class. Or use Timeline.js to make collaborative timelines with Google Sheets. There are also a lot of digital tools that can help when it comes to planning major assignments. In all of the classes I taught, students were expected to write short and long essays. I would recommend talking to your professor and seeing if they're amenable to giving students options beyond written work. Many educators have experimented with the quote unessay. The unessay fits really well into the framework of UDL. Instead of assigning final essays, a professor of English at the University of Lethbridge named Daniel Paul O'Donnell assigned something he called the unessay. He talked about its success on his website in 2012, and since then, digital humanists have taken it into a ton of different directions. When you assign one of these projects, you ask the student to come up with a topic instead of offering them a prompt. You also give them a range of options, or allow them to pitch their project entirely. Students have created imaginary memoirs. They've curated online digital archives. They've transcribed materials. They've made comics, videotaped documentaries, recorded podcast interviews, and a whole range of other projects. And I think that's really amazing and more productive for us and for our students than 60 drafts of the same essay. So far, we've talked about classroom policy, activities for section, and assessments. And I want to take a minute to step back and remind you that all of these realms, in terms of class planning, section, and assignments, need to be accessible. UDL prides itself on incorporating accessible modes of interaction from the start. I don't want to bore you with too many details because the guide covers this in full, but please make sure that your materials are accessible, as are the activities that you assign during section. If a video has no captions, don't assign it. If a PDF can't be remediated, don't assign it. And if you can't figure out how to implement some of these accessibility demands, that's okay. Check out the resources at UVA. We have an accessibility coordinator. There are people at the library and at SDAC who will help you. Ask for help when you're confused and share solutions with one another. I want to focus on one last point in terms of classroom behavior to end our session today. In order to effectively implement UDL, you need to rethink what image you have of your students and what image you have of professional behavior. We often tell our students to speak up, We say, it's expected that you develop public speaking skills. We tell students they need to be articulate. And I'd really like you to think about why that is. Why is it not equally valid for students to communicate in different formats? Through writing or expression or other forms of engagement. A lot of the qualities that we claim to foster are qualities that contribute to ableism. And when we tell students that they need to develop certain skills, we tell students with disabilities that they are not enough. We tell students with anxiety issues that they can just overcome their anxiety if they want to make a career. We tell students with processing disorders that the world won't wait for them. We tell students with stutters that they just need more practice. When we tell students that they shouldn't say or like, or they should practice public speaking so they don't flush, or they should make themselves uncomfortable, we're completing the cycle of discrimination. And we're limiting ourselves from imagining a world in which those things don't really matter. I think that's a huge loss. So I will end my panel on this point. Do you care about your students actually learning? Or do you care about the performativity of learning? I think regardless of where we are in our teaching, whether we're experienced or inexperienced, we need to sit with that question. All too often, we demand impossibilities from our disabled students and our disabled colleagues. It's time that we reassess. Thank you.